Right, so Israel and Jordan. A lot of people around the world have a certain amount of disdain for Israel's immediate neighbour to the east, widely seen as having been allied to Israel in a lot of respects. Certainly that has been observed as strikes, notably from Iran against Israel, have been intercepted in Jordanian airspace, as a for instance. But equally, there have been large protests against what Israel has been doing. Jordan's Queen Rania has been very outspoken in her condemnation of Israel. And of course, as I covered in another recent video, Netanyahu pretty much got his backside handed to him on a plate by the Jordanian foreign minister at the UN, rubbishing claims made by Netanyahu at the time that Israel was surrounded by enemies. And at that time I thought, well, perhaps Israel views Jordan as being too neutral and wants to drag them in further to the conflict, to fully pick a side, so to speak, being too neutral, too non-committal to Netanyahu's regime, or as being barracked as being an enemy by default due to its neutrality, and therefore Israel had basically insulted them. Well, a recent development has revealed there may be something more to this, something that may end up forcing Jordan's hand in, actually picking a side at some point. And it may be that Israel is about to make their minds up for them if they aren't careful. Right, so Jordan, playing the neutral card is what they've been doing, seemingly, whilst Israel has ravaged Gaza, certainly. And for many people around the world, it's one of those when good men do nothing kind of situations. Their neutrality largely being seen as unforgivable in light of the atrocities being committed that are now, of course, spreading, with Israel having moved into Lebanon, invading there, attacking UNIFIL peacekeeping troops there, Irish, Sri Lankan, Indonesian and more nations, peoples having been threatened or hurt as part of UNIFIL, serving in UNIFIL, as the IDF thinks little of them being in the way of them committing even more genocide now in another country. Where Jordan has allowed its airspace to be used to defend Israel from missile strikes heading their way, for example, from Iran, equally there has been condemnation too. As another example, mass protests just 2 days ago in the Jordanian capital of Amman saw thousands protest, scenes quite reminiscent of the ones we've observed in London. Criticism has also come from Jordanian politicians. The words of Jordan's foreign minister Ayman Safadi, which went ignored by our mainstream media the other week, but which went viral across social media, condemned the regime of Netanyahu utterly, speaking as he was on behalf of the 57 states that make up the Organization of Islamic Cooperation at the UN, attacking Netanyahu's woe is me attitude, his professional victim status sales pitch to the world, when Jordan, an immediate neighbour, has been largely no such thing, to the point many around the world have attacked Jordan for not doing nearly enough. Well, that stance of Jordan's going forwards may well be untenable. In fact, I'm certain of it, a point I'll come back to in a moment. But for those critical of Jordan's position as it's been thus far, it's worth looking at why they take that stance, why they've held that stance for decades, frankly. Politically and geographically, Jordan is in a very unenviable position, all in all. They are literally the one nation caught between a rock and a hard place, as they border Israel and the West Bank to their west, their western border being the River Jordan itself, the river from that infamous adage, from the river to the sea. But to their east, they border Syria and Iraq, both nations with militant groups that are part of that Iranian axis of resistance, or proxies as the West media likes to call them. And of course, beyond Iraq, further east, is Iran itself. So Jordan lying in the flight path of missiles launched from Iran on Israel, as they have been on 2 occasions this year now. Taking a neutral stance, therefore, given who is on either side of them, you might appreciate a little bit why they thought that might be the best policy. The trouble is, as much as staying out of it might be fine by many of these more involved state actors, it isn't for Israel, and Israel are plotting away over this. You see, whilst the Jordanian monarchy and government might be playing the neutral card, many of their own people aren't, because they come from a diverse array of different backgrounds, and they are very much taking positions, especially when you consider roughly half of Jordan's population of some 11 million people are people of Palestinian descent, descendants of those who fled to Jordan during the Nakba, or are refugees from Iraq and Syria. So you can imagine that a lot of people there with some very anti-Israeli sentiments, some very anti-warfare, anti-invasion sentiment. They've lived through a lot. And the recent success of the right-wing Islamic Action Front Party, very anti-Zionist, very right-wing also though, as they also are, bears that out somewhat. They actually won 1/5 of parliamentary seats in last month's Jordanian general election, though of course in Jordan the ultimate arbiter of rule is the king, Abdullah II. The government there has limited power, shall we say. On the opposite flank, more pro-Israel, is the Jordanian intelligence service, the Mukhabarat. This already has links to Israeli intelligence, Mossad, and to Western intelligence services too. The Jordanian macabre largely brought into being with the help of MI6. So perhaps not surprising that just like the overtly Zionist West, this Western creation within Jordan is in large part as well. Going back to King Abdullah though, he's been on the throne for 25 years. And for all of that time, he's thought to balance the tensions of Israel against those of Iran and by extension Iran's allies. Caught in the middle of that as Jordan is, and indeed divided along those separate lines as Jordan's population is. On one hand, Abdullah has been warning for decades about Iranian expansionism and the spread of their beliefs across a wider part of the Middle East, as has the Mukhabarat been making similar opinings. But then equally he will allow his wife, unrestrained, Queen Rania, to slam the Israeli regime for the genocide they're carrying out, to the point even she has been accused overtly by the media, Western media, US media notably, of being an anti-Semite. But then she's also Palestinian, so of course she would be called as such, wouldn't she? And of course all the protests that have happened in Jordan have been allowed to carry on too, which is actually rather unusual, because Jordan fear that an increase in the popularity of the Muslim Brotherhood by allowing protests to take place is what would end up resulting from a lot of that. But the balancing act of Abdullah is going to collapse, and we're already seeing the first signs of it. Israel have now come out and said that Jordan is at risk of being destabilised, not by them of course, but by Iran. The two shooters who crossed the border dressed as Jordanian soldiers, taken out by the IDF as they were the other day, which itself followed the attack 5 weeks ago of another Jordanian who crossed into Israel and killed 3 Israelis. Israel have attempted to sell the story of these latest 2 gunmen as being Iranian. However, the Muslim Brotherhood, who are represented by that now slightly larger party presence in Jordanian government, the Islamic Action Front Party, as much as Jordanian royalty fears such things, claimed they were their men. This is a dissent growing in Jordan then, but that doesn't make for a very convenient narrative for Israel, does it? They can destabilise Jordan themselves by claiming Jordan is being destabilised not internally, but by Iran instead. No longer is the neutral stance of King Abdullah therefore going to be good enough for Israel, clearly, if this is the line of attack they're now going to go down against Jordan. As far as this situation progressing goes, we've now got 2 options to come, in my view, neither of which bode very well for Jordan at Israel's hands. And such is the sinister motivations implied by this video's title, for example, and actually one of these options leads into the other happening anyway, if it were to come to pass. It's whether the first bit comes to pass first, I suppose. But anyway, the first option, if we'll just look at it first, is a plan which is often shorted to just saying Jordan is Palestine in Israel. What this means has been floated in a couple of different ways over years, but Netanyahu's Likud party has fronted it as them annexing the West Bank for Israel, much as we suspect we're beginning to see in the north of Gaza, as Israel is basically conducting an extermination there now of all Gazans so they can seize the land for themselves. But the same happening in the West Bank too, so there is no more Palestine at all in what they call Israel, but it's all in Jordan. No Palestine west of the River Jordan, by basically declaring Jordan to be Palestine over on the eastern side of the River Jordan instead. Fundamentally, this will be delivered in much the same way as we're seeing Israel conduct itself in northern Gaza. The Palestinian people can either leave or they can die. It's even been passed in the Knesset that Israel opposes any Palestinian state on any land west of the River Jordan. It passed by 68 votes to just 9, when of course that is not a decision Israel has any right to take. The second part of this, though, whether Palestine becomes established in Jordan or not, is that Israel still wouldn't leave matters like that. The can of worms for a greater Israel has now been opened, and by destabilising Jordan, as they are clearly trying to do at this moment in time, it gives Israel the cue to later on move on to them. Here's that map of Greater Israel that's being talked about. For so many years, this has been regarded as little more than a conspiracy theory and nonsense. But you now have Israeli ministers like Bezalel Smotrich openly calling for it and advocating for it. And it's no good Israel not having an excuse to not conquer Jordan, because it's an integral part of these plans. Taking out Lebanon just in the north of Israel, as we're seeing Israel doing now, invading, well, if they do go all the way, that might then give them access to more of Syria than the Golan Heights, which they already hold, and that part of Turkey, which apparently comes into this greater Israel plan. But it is only through Jordan that Iraq and the north of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait become accessible. This might seem to many to still be completely fanciful that Israel would ever do this. Not be able to, surely. There's no way the world would fund it for a start. But exactly where are the brakes being applied to them is what I would ask at this point. Even if things do not spread to this extent, why are Israel so keen to destabilise Jordan when neutrality has suited both parties, it seems, perfectly well for the last 25 years? With their claims now of Iranian intrusion, though, despite King Abdullah having for decades called out the idea of Iranian expansionism, an overtly pro-Israel line of thinking, as if he would allow it in his own country. It's literally why he shuts down protests a lot of the time, because of the Muslim Brotherhood, and them promoting such ideals. It makes no sense. But then looking at Israel, and whatever they say and whatever they do, does anything frankly make sense to a sane mind? The threat of Jordan exists only in the heads of some paranoid Israelis in positions of power. The war of words is only just beginning now. We know where it goes from there, though, because we've seen it escalate. But what do you think? Will Israel leave Jordan alone? Will Jordan start taking threats of a greater Israel and the consequences that means for them, or them being destabilised to whatever extent by Israel, any more seriously? And will that change their diplomatic stance? Or is it still just conspiracy theorism at the end of the day? Do let me know what you think in the comments. Some in Jordan certainly aren't backing down, as this video recommendation aforementioned earlier will tell you all about those your suggested next watch, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.